The Krell Dominion had existed for over 1,000 years, conquering world after world, crushing every species that dared to stand against them. They had grown arrogant, believing themselves to be the true rulers of the galaxy. So when they first encountered humanity, they laughed. A species with no grand empire, no vast fleets, no legendary warriors. The humans were scattered, occupying only a handful of planets, with technology barely matching that of the lowest-tier galactic civilizations. To the Krell, humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience, a small obstacle to be removed like so many others before. And so, without a declaration of war, without warning, the Krell attacked. The colony on Vesta Prime never stood a chance. It was a peaceful world, home to 5 million humans who had no reason to believe war would come to them. The first sign of danger was the sudden blackout of planetary communications. Then came the explosions. Krell warships entered orbit, unleashing relentless bombardments that turned cities into firestorms. Ground forces followed, towering beasts clad in heavy armor, slaughtering anyone who tried to fight. Within hours, the colony was no more. The Krell commander, General Vogtel, stood on the bridge of his warship, looking down at the burning world below, satisfied with his victory. He had been told humans were weak, fragile creatures with no true military power. The battle had proved it. There had been no real resistance, no fleet rushing to defend their people. It was almost disappointing. Vogtel turned to his second-in-command and scoffed. "Is this the great humanity the galaxy speaks of? They are nothing. Their worlds will fall just as easily." His officers laughed, already celebrating their victory. The news spread quickly across the Dominion, and the Krell people cheered. They expected retaliation, but the humans did nothing. No threats, no counterattack, just silence. The Krell took it as submission. They assumed humanity was too afraid to fight back. They were wrong. The first sign that something was wrong came a week later. A Krell supply ship traveling through the outer systems suddenly disappeared. No distress call, no wreckage, just gone. Then another, and another. The Krell fleet sent patrols, but they never returned. Panic began to spread among the high-ranking officers. Vogtel dismissed their concerns. Pirates. Sabotage. Nothing more. He was wrong. On the 10th day after the destruction of Vesta Prime, a Krell colony went dark. A world home to 10 million Krell simply vanished from all communications. When a fleet was sent to investigate, they found only silence. Not a single Krell remained. Buildings stood untouched, ships docked in place. But there was no life. It was as if the entire population had been erased. The surviving officers began to whisper among themselves, fear creeping into their voices. Who could have done this? What force could wipe out a world without a trace? Vogtel refused to believe humanity was responsible. The humans had no fleets powerful enough to challenge the Dominion. But then the message came. It was simple. A transmission sent directly to the Krell High Command. No video, no voice, just words. "You started this. We will finish it." The galaxy had seen countless wars, but this was something different. The Krell had assumed humanity would fight like every other species. They thought there would be fleets clashing in open space, grand battles to determine the victor. But humanity had chosen another path. They did not fight wars. They ended them. One by one, Krell colonies began to disappear. Their greatest warships were found drifting in space, lifeless, their crews missing. Krell commanders who had led the attack on Vesta Prime were found dead in their own fortresses, their security systems untouched. The Krell Dominion, once the most feared power in the galaxy, was beginning to crumble, and they had no idea how to stop it. The silence that had once made them believe humanity was weak had now become something far more terrifying. It was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of predators stalking their prey. And by the time the Krell realized their mistake, it was already too late. The Krell Dominion had never known fear. For centuries, they had ruled with an iron fist, crushing resistance wherever it appeared. Their fleets were unmatched, their armies unstoppable. They had conquered countless worlds, reducing civilizations to nothing but ashes and forgotten history. To them, war was a simple game, one they always won. But this time, something was different. Humanity did not play by the same rules. Humanity did not send envoys begging for peace, nor did they respond with desperate counterattacks like so many others before them. They simply vanished from the galactic stage. No threats, no warnings, nothing but silence. It was the kind of silence that made even the most battle-hardened Krell uneasy. And then, the disappearances began. At first, it was small things, supply convoys vanishing in deep space, minor outposts going dark without explanation. The Krell assumed it was sabotage, the work of desperate human survivors seeking revenge. It was nothing to worry about, they told themselves. A nuisance at best. But then the disappearances grew bolder. Fleets sent to investigate never returned. High-ranking officials who had ordered the destruction of the human colony on Vesta Prime were found dead, their bodies mutilated in ways that defied explanation. The more the Krell tried to understand, the less sense it made. How could humanity be doing this? They had no empire, no fleets capable of matching the Dominion's power. And yet, Krell space was unraveling piece by piece. What was once a victorious conquest was now turning into something far worse. A hunt. And the Krell were not the hunters. They were the prey. General Vogtel, the architect of the attack on Vesta Prime, was one of the few still unwilling to accept reality. He stood aboard the bridge of his massive warship, the Iron Fang, staring at the holomap before him. Dozens of red markers blinked across Krell territory, each one a missing colony, a lost fleet, a broken supply line. He gritted his teeth, his claws clenching into fists. "This is impossible," he growled. His officers stood in silence, unwilling to meet his gaze. They had no answers, no explanations, only fear. "Humanity is weak," Vogtel spat. "We crushed their colony in a single day. They should be begging for their lives. Yet here we are, losing entire fleets to ghosts. I will not stand for this." But even as he spoke, another red marker flashed on the map. Another Krell stronghold. Gone. Vogtel felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Doubt. The Krell finally tried to respond. They tightened security, doubled their patrols, reinforced their defenses. But none of it mattered. Humanity was already inside their walls. The first sign of the true horror came when a Krell command station, one of their most secure bases, suddenly lost control of its own systems. Security cameras went dark. Automated defenses turned against their own soldiers. Doors locked and refused to open as something moved through the halls. The few distress calls that made it out spoke of shadows that moved without sound, of figures appearing and vanishing in the blink of an eye. And then silence. When a Krell fleet arrived to investigate, they found the station abandoned. No bodies, no signs of battle, only a single human phrase written on every screen. "We are coming." Panic spread like wildfire. The Krell had always been feared, but now they were the ones afraid. Their soldiers whispered of ghosts, of demons that moved unseen through the darkness, striking without warning and leaving nothing behind. Some even began to desert, choosing to flee rather than face whatever horror was coming for them. But there was nowhere to run. Humanity was everywhere and nowhere at once. And then, the Dominion's capital itself received a message. No video, no voice, just words. "You should have left us alone." Vogtel's rage turned to desperation. He ordered a full-scale retreat from the outer territories, pulling his forces back to the core worlds. It was the only way to regroup, to try and make sense of what was happening. But deep down, he knew the truth. The war had already been decided, and for the first time in his life, General Vogtel understood what it meant to be afraid. The Krell Dominion had always been the predator, never the prey. For centuries, they had expanded their empire through fire and blood, crushing every species that dared to resist. They had never encountered an enemy they could not break. But now, as the walls of their empire crumbled, as their fleets vanished one by one, they faced an enemy unlike any before. Humanity had not fought them in open battle. Humanity had not sent armadas to challenge their warships. Instead, they had disappeared, slipping into the shadows, watching, waiting, and then striking when the Krell least expected. It was not war. It was a slow, methodical extermination, and it was working. Voktal had tried everything. He had ordered every available fleet to return to the core worlds. He had doubled planetary defenses, increased patrols, executed officers for failure, but none of it had stopped the disappearances. Entire warships were found drifting in space, their crews gone, their systems intact but utterly lifeless. Planets fell silent overnight, with no explosions, no sign of struggle, only empty cities left behind, as if the populations had simply ceased to exist. Some officers whispered of monsters in the dark, of things that moved unseen, striking with inhuman precision. Others believed the humans had discovered some new weapon, something beyond the Krell's understanding. But Voktal knew the truth. This was not technology. This was not strategy. This was vengeance. Humanity had learned from the Krell. And now, they were returning the lesson. The Krell High Command had once laughed at the idea of human resistance. Now, they sat in terrified silence. The Grand War Council, once filled with the roars of warriors planning new conquests, had become a place of hushed whispers and fearful glances. No one wanted to speak the words aloud, but the truth hung heavy in the air. The Dominion was losing. No, not losing, dying. And they did not even know how to fight back. Every countermeasure they deployed had failed. Every attempt to track the human forces had led to nothing. The humans were invisible, untouchable, a force of destruction that no Krell could predict or escape. It was no longer a question of how to defeat them. It was a question of survival. And then the humans finally spoke. A single transmission, broadcast across every Krell-controlled world, every Dominion fleet, every military outpost. No demands, no negotiations, just a message. You are prey now. The words sent a shockwave through the Krell ranks. Fear turned into chaos. Soldiers abandoned their posts. Entire garrisons refused orders, unwilling to be the next to vanish. High-ranking officials flowed into hiding, fearing they would be targeted next. And through it all, Voktal remained on his warship, gripping the edges of his command console so tightly that his claws cracked the metal. His empire, the great Krell Dominion, was collapsing before his very eyes. Desperation drove him to a final plan. If the humans would not fight like a normal enemy, then he would force them into the open. He ordered the destruction of every remaining human colony, hoping to draw them into a direct confrontation. If the humans cared for their people, they would have to act. They would have to reveal themselves. He chose a target, New Terra, one of humanity's last major settlements, a planet housing millions of survivors. The fleet was assembled, the order given. The warships jumped into hyperspace, ready to burn the world to the ground. But when they arrived, they were not the hunters. They were the bait. The humans were already there, waiting. Not in warships, not in fleets, but in something far worse. The Krell fleet's systems failed the moment they exited hyperspace. Weapons locked. Engines froze. Communications went silent. Then the screaming began, not from weapons fire, not from battle, but from within the ships themselves. One by one, the Krell forces fell into chaos as something moved through their ranks, unseen, unstoppable. The last transmission from the fleet was nothing but static, followed by a single message in human standard. Now, we end this. And then, the Krell fleet was gone. The Krell High Command had no words, no explanations, no hope. An entire fleet had vanished over New Terra without a single shot fired. No wreckage, no distress calls, just silence. The greatest military force in the Dominion's history had been swallowed whole, and no one knew how. The surviving Krell forces across the galaxy were breaking apart. Officers refused to take command of ships. Soldiers deserted in record numbers. Even the Dominion's most hardened warriors were whispering in fear. The humans are ghosts. They are demons. They are death itself. Voktal wanted to call it cowardice. But deep inside, he felt it too. He had fought hundreds of battles, conquered worlds, wiped out entire species without hesitation. But nothing had prepared him for this. Humanity was fighting a war unlike any before. And they were winning. The High Command gathered in secret, deep within the fortified heart of the Dominion's homeworld. No one wanted to admit it, but the reality was clear. The Krell were no longer an empire. They were survivors, running from something they could not see, could not understand. Every attempt to retaliate had failed before it even began. Ships sent to patrol vanished. Leaders who spoke of fighting back were found dead in their own chambers, their throats slit with surgical precision. There were no traces of the attackers, no signs of a struggle, only the undeniable truth that the humans were inside their walls. The final illusion of safety had been shattered. The Krell had always believed themselves untouchable, yet humanity had walked straight into their most protected spaces, as if they owned them. Voktal stood before the last of his trusted generals, his voice a growl of barely contained rage. "We cannot just sit here and wait for death." His words echoed in the chamber, but no one responded. They all knew the truth. There was no counterattack, no defense, no strategy that could save them now. Humanity had already won. The Krell just hadn't accepted it yet. Voktal's claws tightened into fists. "Then we give them no choice. We make them fear us." His plan was madness. But at this point, madness was all they had left. If the humans wanted to hunt them from the shadows, then the Krell would force them into the light. The order was given. The Dominion's last remaining fleets converged on a single target, the Sol system. It was a final act of desperation. Earth had been untouched throughout the war, and if the humans had a weakness, it would be there. The Krell would strike the birthplace of their enemy, reducing it to cinders. If the humans were truly invincible, they would have to prove it. The last Krell armada, battered and broken but still formidable, launched toward humanity's homeworld, ready to burn it out of existence. As the fleet approached the Sol system, an eerie stillness filled the bridge of Voktal's flyship. No resistance, no response. It was as if the humans didn't care. But as they neared Earth, the sensors went haywire. Something was wrong. The stars themselves seemed to shift. Shadows moved where there should have been none. And then, all at once, the trap was sprung. The void exploded with activity. Not from massive warships or fleets, but from something much worse. The humans had been waiting. Not in conventional ships, not in any form the Krell had expected. They came in small, nearly invisible crafts, moving like phantoms through the darkness, striking with pinpoint accuracy. Krell vessels lost power instantly as cybernetic warfare shut them down from the inside. In the silence of space, unseen human forces boarded the ships with terrifying precision. The battle was over before it began. One by one, the Krell fleet fell into chaos. Crews screamed over the comms, begging for orders, but there was no one left to give them. Ships turned against one another as control systems were hijacked remotely. Voktal watched in horror as his forces were dismantled, not by brute force, but by something far more insidious. Humanity had never intended to fight a war of ships and soldiers. They had turned war itself into a psychological nightmare, a slow, inevitable death that the Krell could not stop. And then, a message flashed across every Krell screen, a final, chilling declaration from the species they had so foolishly provoked. "Your war is over. Now you will understand what it means to be hunted." Voktal stared at the words, his hands trembling for the first time in his life. He had thought the Krell were the apex predators of the galaxy. He had thought humanity was just another species to be conquered. But he had been wrong. So very, very wrong. The Krell had not started a war. They had triggered their own extinction. The Krell Dominion had ruled through fear. They had crushed civilizations, enslaved entire species, and rewritten history in their favor. They believed strength was absolute. That power was the only law the galaxy obeyed. But now, they were learning a new lesson, one they had never imagined possible. The hunters had become the hunted. Their fleets had been reduced to nothing. Their armies had crumbled. Their leaders were either dead or in hiding. And yet, the humans had not demanded surrender. They had not offered negotiations. They had simply continued, one by one, to erase the Krell from existence. This was not war. This was extermination. Voktal stood alone in his war room, staring at the holomap of the Dominion's remaining strongholds. He had once looked at these maps with pride, seeing the vastness of their empire stretching across the stars. Now, all he saw were tombs waiting to be sealed. The humans were striking in ways that defied logic. They were not attacking planets with overwhelming force. Instead, they slipped into Krell-controlled worlds like shadows, dismantling infrastructure, sabotaging defenses, and turning entire populations against their rulers. Civil unrest was spreading. Krell citizens who had once worshipped the Dominion's strength now feared that staying loyal would mark them for death. Even those who had never questioned the Empire before were now whispering about surrender, if surrender was even an option. But that was the true horror. The humans had made no demands. There were no ultimatums, no conditions for peace. It was as if they were beyond diplomacy, as if they had reached a level of vengeance that words could no longer touch. The Krell had started this war believing they would break humanity. Instead, they had awakened something far worse than they had ever encountered. The humans did not want victory. They wanted annihilation. Desperation clawed at Voktal's mind. He had spent his life leading the Dominion's conquests, had never known what it was to lose. But now, for the first time, he faced an enemy he could not fight, could not reason with, could not stop. The humans had mastered war in a way the Krell had never dreamed of. They did not fight for territory or resources. They fought for survival. And a species that fights for survival will do anything to win. In one last act of defiance, Voktal gathered what remained of his forces and launched a final counteroffensive. It was madness, but madness was all they had left. He ordered a desperate strike on one of humanity's remaining strongholds, a hidden base suspected to be a major command center. If they could strike back, even once, it would prove the Krell were not finished. It would remind the galaxy that they were still a force to be feared. The fleet launched, their engines burning through the void, the last warriors of a dying empire. But as they approached the human outpost, something felt wrong. There were no defenses, no alarms, no sign of resistance. The Krell ships moved in cautiously, scanning for traps, expecting an ambush. But the station was silent. And then the humans answered. Not with ships, not with weapons, but with silence. Every Krell vessel lost power in an instant, not from an attack. There was no impact, no explosion, just darkness. Their systems shut down. Their weapons went dead. Their engines failed. And then the screaming began, not from outside, but from within their own ships. One by one, the Krell officers realized what was happening. The humans were already inside. They had been inside. The battle had been lost before it even started. Krell soldiers tried to fight back. But against what? The humans moved through the shadows, unseen, unheard. By the time the Krell realized they were being hunted, it was already too late. Their screams echoed through the empty corridors, cut short one by one. There was no mercy, no prisoners. Voktal listened as his fleet fell silent. His hands trembled as the reality set in. The Krell were no longer at war. They were being erased. His empire was gone. His people were gone. And now, it was his turn. A cold voice echoed through the ship's broken comm system. A human voice. Calm. Final. You wanted war. Now it is over. And then the lights went out. The Krell had never known true fear, not until now. Not until their empire had crumbled, their fleets had vanished, and their leaders had fallen silent. Not until their proudest warriors had been reduced to ghosts, their names lost in the void, never to be remembered. The Dominion had once stretched across the stars, unchallenged, unbreakable. But humanity had changed everything. They had not just fought back. They had shattered the very foundation of the Krell's beliefs. Strength, power, those meant nothing now. The Krell had believed themselves to be the ultimate predators, but they had been wrong. So very, very wrong. Because now they understood. Humanity was not a species that waged war. Humanity was a species that ended war. Voktal sat in the darkness of his war chamber, staring at the silent holomat. There was nothing left to command. No fleets to order. No armies to rally. The Dominion's homeworld, once a beacon of conquest and authority, was a graveyard of panic and despair. The streets were empty. The great halls where war councils had gathered were abandoned. The once mighty cities now whispered with the terrified murmurs of those who had survived long enough to realize the truth. Humanity was no longer fighting them. They were erasing them. And they had done so without a single declaration of war. The humans had never needed grand battles. They had never needed to match the Krell ship for ship, soldier for soldier. No, their war had been waged in the shadows, in silence, in ways the Krell had never imagined. Communications had been cut without explanation. Weapons had failed at the worst moments. Leaders had disappeared without a trace, leaving entire fleets directionless. Even the planets that had once been strongholds of the Dominion now lay empty, abandoned in fear. And the worst part, no one had seen the humans coming. No one had ever fought them in direct battle. They were everywhere and nowhere. The Krell had spent centuries believing themselves the masters of war, but they had never understood what war truly meant. Voktal had tried to fight back. He had launched desperate offensives, sent out final commands, ordered what little remained of the Dominion to stand and fight. But his messages had never reached their destinations. His fleets had never made it past their jump points. His own officers had started vanishing, one by one, until there was no one left to give orders to. He was alone, a ruler without an empire, a warlord without a war. The silence was worse than death. The last message from the humans had been simple. No threats, no gloating, just a single statement sent across every remaining Dominion frequency. This is not war. This is consequence. Voktal had spent days trying to understand those words. He had fought against them, denied them, cursed them. But deep down, he knew the truth. The Krell had not simply lost a war. They had unleashed something they had never been prepared for. Humanity had not fought for territory, for control, or for power. They had fought because the Krell had given them no other choice. And a species fighting for survival did not stop when the enemy surrendered. A species fighting for survival made sure the threat would never rise again. A low hum echoed through the chamber. The lights flickered. He knew what that meant. The humans were here. They had always been here. Voktal took a deep breath, steadying himself. There was no point in running. No point in fighting. He had led the Dominion to this moment. He had brought this fate upon his people. And now he would face the end. The doors to the war chamber slid open without a sound. Shadows moved in the dim light. Silent figures stepped forward, their presence undeniable, their purpose absolute. Voktal clenched his fists, standing tall as they approached. He would not beg. He would not plead. He would face the humans with what little pride he had left. A single voice spoke, cold, unyielding, final. It's over. The lights went out, and the Dominion was no more. The Dominion was gone. Not defeated, not conquered, gone. Their fleets had vanished into the void. Their worlds had fallen silent, and their leaders had been erased, one by one. There was no surrender. There was no negotiation. There was only the cold, methodical disappearance of an empire that had once believed itself unstoppable. The Krell had waged war against humanity, believing it to be just another conquest, another species to break and enslave. But they had not understood what they were truly facing. Humanity was not a race that fought for power or control. Humanity fought for survival. And when pushed to the edge, they did not stop at victory. They did not accept surrender. They ensured that the enemy would never rise again. The last Krell stronghold was nothing more than a dying ember in the vast darkness of space. The once mighty world, the heart of the Dominion's power, had become a hollow ruin. Cities that had once pulsed with the energy of conquest now lay empty, abandoned. The few Krell who remained hid in the shadows, terrified to even breathe too loudly. They had seen what had happened to those who resisted. They had watched entire fleets crumble without a single shot being fired. They had witnessed leaders vanish from locked rooms, their fate unknown but unquestionable. Humanity had not just won. They had erased the Dominion from existence. Voktal stood alone in the grand chamber of his palace, though it no longer felt grand. The towering walls, once adorned with banners of victory, now felt suffocating. The silence was unbearable. Every attempt to call for reinforcements, to reach out to the remaining Krell, had ended the same way. Dead air. There was no one left. No fleets, no armies, no allies. He was the last, the final remnant of an empire that had ruled through fear. And now he was the one who was afraid. The humans had never made demands. They had never sent messages of triumph or warnings of destruction. They had simply acted. They had moved like ghosts, striking without warning, vanishing without a trace. The Krell had always believed themselves to be the greatest warriors in the galaxy, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Humanity did not fight for glory. They fought for finality. A cold wind drifted through the chamber as the power flickered. Voktal closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He knew what was coming. He had known for days. He had felt it in the silence, in the way the shadows seemed to move on their own. They were here. They had always been here. The doors to the chamber slid open without a sound. No alarms blared. No guards stood to stop them. There was no need. The fight had ended long before this moment. Dark figures stepped forward, their presence as silent as death itself. Their weapons did not glow, did not hum with energy. They did not need weapons. Voktal turned to face them. His claws tightened, but he did not reach for a weapon. He had no delusions of victory. There would be no last stand, no final battle. He had ordered the war. He had unleashed this nightmare. And now he would face its end. One of the humans stepped forward, their face obscured by the shadows. Their voice was quiet, almost calm. "Your people are gone." Voktal inhaled sharply but said nothing. What was there to say? There will be no history of the Dominion, no records, no stories, no memory. The words were not a threat. They were a statement of fact. Voktal clenched his fists. He had believed in strength, in power, in the unbreakable might of the Krell Dominion. But in the end, it had meant nothing. The human took another step forward. "This is what happens when you challenge us." The lights went out, and with them, the last remnant of the Krell Dominion faded into the dark, forgotten by the galaxy, erased from time itself.